Hello, this is the Node.js benchmarking meeting for 2016. Sorry, April 2016. And we're still waiting for some people, but I thought I'd start the broadcast just in case anybody was joining in terms of wanting to be able to watch. Which of the links did you follow? I'm wondering if I got the right one.
So I followed the one from the issue that's on GitHub.
Right, in the link for participants?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That should be the right one then. Hello?
Hi.
Hi, how you doing? We're just giving a few people a few more minutes to start. I think it's about 5 after. We'll maybe give 1 or 2 more minutes and then get started.
Something is.
What was that?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Michael.
Yep. Hi, how you doing?
Oh, yeah. This is Uttam from Intel,
Good.
and I have my colleague here, Alexandru.
Okay. Hello. We're just about to get started, I think. 1 more minute and then we'll start.
Okay.
So if you guys can edit the minutes document just to add in your name and contact info. I'll start by adding myself. Gareth, do you have access or do you want me to add you?
I just got that link.
Okay. Okay, so I think we might as well get started. Our existing agenda is a quick stand-up for the things we've been working on since the last time we met, actions from the last meeting, a review of the use cases. There's a pull request where we've captured some of the key use cases for Node, and I'd like us to go through that and have a discussion, and then go through any of the other open issues to see if there's anything else that we need to discuss or push forward on those fronts. So far, we have present Michael Dawson, Gareth Ellis, Udom Pawar, and Alexandru Oensia. I probably didn't get the pronunciation of that right. Sorry.
Yeah, Oensia.
Okay. So just starting with the roundtable. Since we last spoke, I believe I can't remember exactly when this happened, but we've done the work to be able to get benchmarking.nodejs.org live so that you can actually go there and see the benchmarks that we're already running and capturing. We've done some work to pull out the use cases in terms of the core Node use cases in that PR. And then, my upcoming to-dos are, since 6.x there's going to be release candidates soon to start, add a new branch in or I guess a new set of data that we start collecting, which is the 6.x performance numbers. Right now, it should basically be the same as master, but as we move forward, that could diverge. Once we capture the use cases, then to start working on seeing what benchmarks we can use to cover those. And I do still have some background tasks, need to do some work in respect to Ansible in order to capture the configuration for our benchmarking machines. That's myself. Gareth, you're next on the list.
Yep, so I think it's since the last one where we've managed to get Acme Air running in the community. Also, I've been running a number of other benchmarks which helped me spot a regression in buffer at the end of March. So the fix for that's been contributed back, and I'm going to be looking at getting these benchmarks that we've been running here contributed back into the benchmarking work group as well, so it's something that perhaps we can be running on a regular basis. I also noticed that there's a large number of sort of benchmark type tests in the Node project already, so I was going to have a look into those, how those work, whether those are something that we could run straight off or whether they need a bit of work to produce a number for us to be able to include in charts. But so yeah, that's pretty much what I've been looking at so far. Oh, and also on Thursday I'll be speaking at Node.js Live regarding benchmarking in Paris.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, Udom.
Just your voice breaking.
Okay, Udom, you're next. Actually, yeah, you're breaking up. We can't hear you. Only it's like one every fifth word.
Well, how about now?
That might be a bit better.
Okay. Well, I try to talk slowly, I guess. Since last time we met, and as you know, we are kind of a new. I'm a new member to this whole discussion. I attend this meeting since January. I think this is my third meeting. Since then, we have downloaded the Acme Air benchmark. We have downloaded nightly build of Node.js and measuring performance of the Acme Air benchmark. And he can probably talk about a little bit more about that. But other than that, I have interface which has a MongoDB database in the
Yeah,
backend.
sorry. Can you start that second part again? Because you're really cutting out for like 10 seconds at a time.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
Well, um, what else?
Yeah, I don't know if it makes any sense for you to try and drop and rejoin or something, but okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can read that.
We have developed a method to
Gareth, I assume you're still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Adam, I think your internet must be going in and out because even the update in the dock paused for 10, 20 seconds there. So just for those, for anybody who's watching, I'm just going to read the update, which Udam's typing into the minutes, basically saying, he's developed a method with a few modifications in Apache Bench program to measure very accurately requests per second metrics. And they've developed a spec-like methodology to capture the environment and performance data. And they plan to present this to the group soon. And then, to present that soon to this group and then for the rest of the community.
Can you hear me, Michael?
I can now.
Okay, so as it said, you can read that status, and I can write a detailed email. Hopefully, I'll describe what we did. I just try to capture the essence of what I've been doing, what we have been doing here at Intel. So we are trying to create a run spec, which is like a very much like a spec CPU type of environment where we can have a very standard way to measure performance, and whatever that benchmark or the benchmark might be anything, whatever we decide. But we are taking an example of Acme Air. There's one we develop in-house, but try to create a metrics which is and the graphs, which is very similar how the spec CPU publishes the result. And we believe that it would be useful to give the whole standard outlook for our benchmarking effort.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, we look forward to seeing the details of that.
Okay.
So should I set that as like yours and Alexandru's update, or does Alexandru have something in addition?
Okay, that's fine. And Alexander can talk maybe a few sentences.
Sure.
He's right next to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically what we are doing currently is to run the Acme app together with a few other uh, micro benchmarks from the benchmarking repo. Um, uh, Currently, we are trying to make it very stable. We are playing with the standard. We are seeing a standard deviation that we want to lock it to low values. Basically, that's it for the moment. We are in the process of adding some other workloads that have been used before for um, um, studying the Node.js behavior into this nightly build, so that we can have several points of analysis then to gather data and to do analysis related to how Node.js behaves in different contexts.
Okay. Sounds good. And maybe as we go through the requirements, if any of the benchmarks that you have cover those, if you can volunteer that, because we'll be looking for ones that can fill in the gaps.
Yes.
Yeah, this is actually part of the effort. We are
Yeah.
looking actively at those and try to understand if they are representative, and we can use them as standards.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so I guess moving on to the agenda items. So actions from the last meeting. So I guess Ali was going to look at the issue in hydrogen mentioned by Gareth. I don't know, Gareth, did he ever get back to you, or do you have any insight?
No, I've not heard anything from Ali since the last meeting.
Okay. I know he tried to make the last one that I forgot about, so I'm just going to roll that over to the next one. Okay, I will then say, okay, so open issues. Actually, the next thing I want to do is, let's look at my agenda here. So actions for last meeting, right? So the next thing I want to do is review the use cases. So I'm going to pull up that work item, or that pull request. So that is, and I'll paste it in the chat window here, just to make it easier for anybody who wants to also open it up. So the goal of this is to define what are the key use cases that we think are important for Node, so that we can then identify benchmarks that cover off each of those use cases. Sort of trying to start with here's what's important to us, then here are the benchmarks that cover it, and it gives us the justification for why we want to run those particular benchmarks, and then we run the benchmarks and capture the data to either spot regressions or to do things like optimizations, where we're optimizing for things that are important. So I'm thinking maybe we can just, there's been some back and forth discussion. I believe I've incorporated all the feedback that, I got, and I just thought, we should discuss that in this meeting. I'll incorporate whatever feedback is there, and then finally we could land the PR. Go ahead.
Michael, this is Uta. So I've been following this discussion. One thing I did not see, in typical Node.js application, we have people normally don't write just based on pure Node.js, right? They will use lots different module, and that's the whole idea. And in some of my testing, what I found, I wrote one simple, just like you, a very simple Node.js application, which has a MongoDB at the database and a very simple endpoint. And when I make a query without any external module, the performance difference between that and when I write the same application using with Express in addition to the application to do the routing, the performance difference is huge. So when we decide, should we have some kind of list, or what are the components we would like to, whether it's a API-based application or full-fledged web application, should we have a list of a standard module could be part of that benchmark?
Right, so let me just take a look at the different use cases. So I think the answer is is yes. I'm just going to go look and see at the use cases, and I'm just doing a little editing here, but we flip back to say where I see that fitting in. So in this case, like if you mention Express, that fits into the, is it for generating, serving dynamic web page content, service-oriented architectures, micro, because like if you look at the generating, serving dynamic web page content, certainly Express, Happy, and Koa are mentioned along with React as one. So I would expect that those would be prime ones for any benchmarks that we do.
So are you looking at the issue number 36 or the pull 36?
Yeah, pull request number 36. So if you go to the one that says generating, serving dynamic web page content.
Your link says pull 36, and that
The easiest way to look at it right now is probably to go onto the files changed.
file change. Okay. Okay, I got it. Okay, so
Right.
which one are you talking about?
Yeah, if you go down, it's about the middle, generating, serving dynamic web page content.
Okay. Yeah, and in this case, it's not even generated. It is still returning a JSON object, just like the pure Node.js application I have. Both are returning the same object, the JSON object. Only thing is, one has a application through Express. So you, instead of directly parsing the URL directly in the Node.js, so you have HTTP creates web server, and you look for the request.method. If it is slash whatever you endpoint, just invoke the query and get the result and send back the JSON formatted data. So that's the only difference. It's not really generating any dynamic web page content.
Right. So I guess, yeah, so there's also, like in the different use cases, there's backend API services, service-oriented architecture, microservice-based applications, generating, serving dynamic web content. Those all could be using Express, right?
Yeah, they are potential, yes.
So I guess I'd say that under any one of those, when we come to a benchmark, what we want to do is benchmark it in a way that we believe people are building those use cases. Right? So for example, if everybody uses Express to build their backend API services, then that's likely what we'd want to include in the benchmark, right?
Right.
And same with any of the other cases. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what, you know, the most common use case is for any of those, but that's where I think the specific technologies would fit in.
Okay.
It could be potentially worth it as sort of an offshoot to try and do a bit of an investigation about the overhead of either having code in a module versus having it straight in the main application, and also perhaps, like Udom said, he's found parts of Express being perhaps slower than just using this pure HTTP module. And then we can decide whether that's something that should be looked at in Node, or perhaps it could be an Express itself issue, maybe.
Exactly, right. If it's not something that's caused by Node, then, or, you know, I think if it's, you know, if it's not caused by Node, then it's not directly applicable. Like, we're not necessarily going to find a regression there. It's still interesting, though, like, you know, if Express is part of our macro benchmarks, we still want to understand those and make sure Node doesn't request them. But the fact that it's slower than doing it in bare Node, yeah, it's interesting, but I'm not sure it fits into the
So the way
benchmarks for Node itself.
Yeah, so the way when I analyzed that difference, I mean, the difference was, it wasn't a couple percent, it was more than 20 odd percentages
Yeah.
different. The same very small, very small application, just by using Express app.get. And then I looked at some of the characteristics, and I found, because now you have more JavaScript code you are bringing in to the execution, that means you are putting more pressure on the V8.
Yep.
It has to compile that. Now we have a larger code footprint, and so on and so forth. So it changes the whole characteristic of the workload by using that module. And so either we make a decision saying if, because let's say if we go to npm registry and we find express is used 90% of the time, or all the download most popular
Yep.
download, whatever some criteria, and we decide to use it, as long as we keep it as a standard, okay, this is always we are going to have it, which is fine. Then people can find the issues with implementation of the express and they can work on it, and we find optimizations, whether it's a V8 or whether it's a JIT, whether it's a GC, and whatever optimization we may find. I was just wanted to bring that up, that I did find an issue where there is a huge overhead by using express in an application, which is very, very small application.
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. And it'd be interesting to know, I guess, is there anything Node can, like, is it something that Node is adding to the mix in terms of, external modules are disadvantaged some way, or is it just that, the more code you have, there's going to be more overhead?
Right.
Or is it even something that Express is doing? So, yeah, I think that's interesting. You're always free, I think, to open like an issue to discuss a particular thing like that, because I think it is interesting to capture that information.
Actually, I'm going to open it, but I since I was just still collecting some
Yeah.
data to back up that, whatever I'm saying, I was just waiting on that. But I do have enough data to actually open the discussion.
Okay, now that sounds good. So in the context then of the use cases, I mean, do you think we need to say something more about, the modules in these use cases, or is it okay to, the first attempt is to say these are just the use cases, and then of course when we build a benchmark, you would want something that reflects what people actually do in those use cases. Do we need to say something about Express or whatever in these, or like, is there something missing from what's here, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I was thinking more of, should we have a standard list of either modules or some kind of standard, or it's like a spec CPU. When I look at the spec CPU, you will find some benchmark which traces the memory usage, which is a huge input data we'll have, and it traces the memory subsystem. You will find some benchmark which traces the branch misprediction or branches in the code.
Yep.
And there's a C++ workload will test the exception handling, right?
Yep.
So is this something we should think about while coming up with our benchmark for Node.js?
I
That's my
think that's another interesting dimension, right? So one dimension is your use cases. Another dimension is exactly what you just said, is that you could look at characteristics of a runtime, like, memory management, native memory usage, and you can try stressing those things. So I think that might be we might want another doc. So this doc is the Node use cases, but then we might want another doc, and the title doesn't come to me right off, but it's something like key runtime attributes, right? And then those things would be things you would also want to test.
right.
Right, you want to test things that reflect your use cases, but you also want to test these key things, and I think that would be good, because if you look at some of the ones we've initially put in, so for example, the startup and the footprint, those are generally two key things of a runtime. So those sort of attributes are important to capture and justify why we're running those benchmarks as well. So yeah, I think I would say, let's capture those things in a separate doc, which we also call, I'm just going to put something here, discussion. I'm going to type it into the thing here, discussion around things like stressing, DC, native memory, etc. I think, if everybody agrees, I can say we agreed that those are also important and should go into another document, which are, maybe it's called key the runtime attributes. I'm happy to take an action to open a pull request for an additional, for an initial version of that, and then everybody can comment in on the things I've missed and stuff like that. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Initial version of that doc. Okay, so kind of looping back then to the use cases. Given that we're going to cover those other aspects in the runtime attributes doc, are there any use cases we think we're missing, or cases where the description of the use cases needs to be tuned or improved? I mean, I think if it might make sense to walk through each one of them, if that makes sense to people.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to flip down to the initial text is kind of an intro, so let's actually go to the specific one. So back-end API services. So this is applications that provide APIs, including REST and REST-like interfaces that we expose data, computation, or other resources that are public-facing. So the focus is largely on interface style, and they're usually both implemented using HTTP and public-facing. They're commonly the foundation for mobile backends with public network latency and bandwidth concerns. So those can often be like, if they're mobile, things like the latency and how much bandwidth you use actually does matter. So any comments or issues on that particular one? We agree it is a use case, and that's a reasonable description. I guess if nobody objects, I'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
Service-oriented architectures. So, applications that primarily provide private APIs with more extreme latency concerns for private networks. They often involve layering and overlapping of service segments and the need for management and aggregation of heterogeneous dependency service calls. So in this case, it's around, services, but more tightly coupled and more likely to be, on the same network or same machine. Okay, the next one was microservices-based applications. So these applications consist of a number of nimble, low-resource, quick startup mini applications. They often use novel networking approaches, including lightweight message protocols and UDP. Key elements are how well multiple small services can be run concurrently. For example, low memory CPU and the speed latency with which requests can be exchanged between the applications and the API microservices. So, we often hear Node being talked about with microservices, and this is the one intended to capture that one. The next one is generating serving dynamic web page content. So they're often built with additional modules like Express, Happy, Koa, React. Probably the same goes for some of the others, but in these cases, it's well known that you're building your web pages with these other modules. And key elements are building and returning dynamic web pages, often using templating type applications. Engines. The next one is SPA applications, which is like single page architecture applications where you have bidirectional communication over WebSockets and or HTTP2. So you have a client and server who talk behind the scenes and dynamically update your single web page to basically provide your GUI app. The GUI for the application is usually delivered through an initial HTTP request, and then subsequent updates are managed through this bidirectional messages between the client and the server using WebSockets or HTTP2. And key elements are things like speed and latency with which the messages can be sent back and forth between the two ends.
So here the WebSockets will be the main component with Node.js application.
Yeah, I mean, a benchmark in this case would really be stressing that you can send messages back and forth between the server and the client over the WebSockets or HTTP connection quickly and with, probably a low latency. Okay, the next one is agents and data collectors. So this is where, the application is running on a system in order to monitor and manage the system, or the application's running in it as directed by an external monitoring management system. The ability to be updated remotely is often a key requirement. So Node, I think we've seen, is used quite often as the agent on a machine when you've got something, remotely managing those machines. And then small scripts. So, Node.js is often used to write simple small scripts, particularly in the areas of build tooling, particularly for front-end engineering. So, key elements are the fast startup stop time as well as low resource memory usage. As you may start or have a lot of scripts running concurrently, and when you run them, you don't want to wait for them to run. They need to run pretty quickly. So those, I guess it's like, are there any other use cases that we can think of that, aren't covered here? Um, you know,
Michael, one thing. So with this application, now we all have the benchmark, let's say, with any of these or all of these characteristics. What
Yep.
about the client program to drive? Do we have a standard? Should we talk about, or at least have a list? Is it Apache Bench or JMeter, or should we have our own client, or is something I'm working on could be useful for as to develop as a client driver program?
I think, in my opinion, it depends on how and where we find the benchmarks. So if we have a list of these and we say, okay, now we need benchmarks to fill in the gaps. If we find existing benchmarks, my first thought is we just use whatever those benchmarks use to drive the load. If we're building them ourselves, then we should choose, and we're going to have to build multiple. Then it would make a lot of sense for us to say, well, here's the load driver that we should use. I think even in some of the issues, there was somebody outside who'd said that they'd done a Node.js equivalent what's the one that actually
It's Jamie. Yeah. Yeah, he raised an issue or whatever against it, but I noticed that he'd closed it shortly before the next benchmarking meeting. I can't remember if it was just before the previous one or maybe before the one that we missed the other week. So I'm not sure why that was, I don't know whether he just closed it or whether he stopped developing whatever his load driver was or whatever. But I mean, we can still reach out to him, I suppose, and see what it is that he's got, and there's no harm in giving it a go and seeing how it runs.
Right. So I guess to answer your question is like, I don't know that we, if we could just find benchmarks that did everything we wanted, I wouldn't know that we need to look to rewrite something. But if we are writing things, then yeah, absolutely, defining here's the standard one we use, and if you're working on something already, that could make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess any other, my plan is that unless we have any other comments, that we should be able to just land this PR as it is. Of course, we can always change if we come up with other use cases or whatever, or need to change it in the future, and then use that as the basis, along with the other one, which is the key, attributes that we'll create as to try and build a matrix that says, here's what we should be benchmarking, and then here's what we're already doing, and how we can fill in the other things. Like in terms of the work that you guys are doing, Odom, are any of the other benchmarks other than Acme Air that you're looking at cover any of these particular cases?
So there is one. So we have a simple employee database type of application, and right now it's very simple, and that's the one I was talking about. I used to understand the difference between the express and the non-express application. So that currently we are using to drive our work. So we made some modification in the Apache Bench because the way Apache Bench kind of gives out the statistics, it just starts its timer at the very beginning before it issues or opens any socket, and gets the time at the end of the request when all the requests are done, and then kind of gives us statistics. So what we did is we tracking each and every request from the start time to end time. We make a request and we get a response. So it gives a very accurate latency information, and that we are going to drive. So currently that application does have not all of this, but it does have, let's say, I added a cryptography. If I want to, it's a login password method, how our cryptographic algorithm works. So that's something I'm experimenting with as part of that benchmark, and but not all of them, the attributes. The memory usage wise, I have a smaller database size where the collection size is under certain limit. Then I increase that, the collection size to from 1 kilobyte to I think 10K, and I do see the performance drops as I increase the size of the data. And also the memory bandwidth goes up, and there's so many different things I observe, and so those are the kind of things I want to capture in that attribute document, really. So those are the
Right.
at least two things I'm doing in my current application.
Okay. Okay, so it'll cover some of those. And just to clarify, I don't expect any benchmark to cover all these different aspects. It could be that a benchmark only covers one of them. It's just that through a number of benchmarks, we want to sort of cover them all, right?
True.
Yeah. Okay. So before we move on, any more discussion we should have on the benchmarking use cases, or do we think we're good there? Okay, I'm going to take silence as move on. So the next action item on the agenda is to look at our open issues. So I'm just going to open a browser where I can do that. Let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to benchmarking issues. We currently have 14 issues open. So first one is the next benchmarking meeting, nothing to be said there. The next three are feature requests on our existing graphs. So one is to add release dates to the charts. So I think that's to basically say when we make a Node 4, Node 6 release, we add that to the chart so we can actually see if changes are coinciding with those. I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be, but it's on the list. So if people have time to help out to look at that, I think that'd be a good one. Capturing the commit hash is another feature request. So that's again on the benchmark data that we should be capturing the commit for which the benchmark run executed. That one I think is relatively straightforward, so we should just do that when we get time to do it. The next one was graphs with a Y basis. So this one I'm not as sure about. It's basically suggesting that the graphs always start at 0. That has the advantage of that small variances don't look like they're bigger than they are. It does have the disadvantage, though, that if there's a wide range in the graph, it can easily hide a variance which we might think is actually important. So I'm leaning more towards leaving it as is as opposed to changing that right now. I'd be interested to what your guys' input as well.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, on some of the graphs, we've got some quite large numbers, which if we did start it all at 0, I think we'd just end up with effectively a straight line containing all of the benchmark, all of the releases that we're testing. Right. I mean, there's nothing stopping us investigating it, having a go and seeing what they look like, and then we can probably make a decision then, or even maybe offer both graphs on the website if people think that would be more useful. But I have a feeling that they're not going to be quite as readable I suppose the other option is, well, I don't know. I don't know actually. I was going to say the other option would be to scale the numbers so they would fit a bit closer, but then I think we'd probably end up with exactly the same problem, that they'd be scaled closer together.
Yeah, once you have the big dynamic range. Udom and Alexandru, what's your thoughts?
Nothing right now.
Okay. So you're happy with it the way it is?
I've not looked at it in kind of detail.
You can, if you get a chance, maybe you can comment on the issue number 33.
Okay.
Yeah, so just if you do.
Yeah. I mean, right now I just did not. I looked at those graphs, but some of the things I was not sure how we are kind of capturing those ops per seconds. That's why. I mean, I looked at it, but I did not know internals how we are getting that data. Alexandru and I, we looked at this graph last week, but I don't know the internals, how we capture, where do we get this data.
Which graph was it? Which one are you in particular?
On benchmarking.nodejs.org.
Okay, so all the scripts that do that are in the repo. So if you want to see the details, you can go into either the. Let me just get there so I can tell you specifically.
Yeah. So I think your question is about how it is that we're getting the numbers that are going into the charts. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So there's 3 of the charts which have ops per second. Was it the Acme Air one or some of the Require benchmarks? Do you know?
Either one is fine.
Okay, so the Acme Air ops per second is the number that comes out of JMeter. So every 6 seconds, I think it is, JMeter goes and prints out how fast it's going, but we also go and log all of the requests that have been served by, or been placed by JMeter, I suppose, and then a timestamp, the amount of time it took for that to be responded to, and also the return code, I think it is, that gets recorded. So for that number, we go and drop the first, I think it's the first 2 minutes of data, because we assume that that Node is going to take Node and also JMeter, with it being a Java application, is going to take about 2 minutes to warm up, and then we take an average of the remaining time, which is the remaining 3 minutes of the run, to work out how many operations or how many responses per second Node was able to respond to, which is what we use as the operations per second.
So this operation is nothing but one request and response. It's a transaction.
Sorry, I just missed that.
The ops. Here the ops is a transaction, right?
The ops per second, yeah, so it's like a transaction or throughput measure. For Acme Air, for the required benchmarks, I believe that's the number of times a second we're able. I'd need to go and have a look into those benchmarks, but I have a feeling that it's something to do with the number of times a second we can start Node. No, I don't know. I'd need to have a look.
The required ones, there's 2 cases. One, they do a require where you've already done, a previous require, so that the module should already be loaded and cached. And the other one is where you're requiring, a new module. and then it is a measure of how many you can do that in a particular interval. So the higher the number, the less overhead there is with the require.
Right. Okay.
So the other thing you can do is in the repo, you can go and look at the specifics of what's being done. If you go into Node.js benchmarking, under there, there's like an experimental directory. So a few of them are still there. I need to move those over, but so either look under benchmarking/benchmarks or benchmarking/experimental, and you can actually see the scripts. So for example, if you're interested in Acme Air under benchmarking, experimental benchmarks, Acme Air, are all the scripts that are being used to run and parse out the results that are then posted. So I guess I'd suggest two things. One, if you have more specific questions, you can always open an issue, and whoever wrote the benchmark can probably respond with more detailed answers, or you can go look at the actual files themselves as well. That makes sense?
Yes, Michael. Sure.
Okay. So sorry, flipping back to the issues. If I think benchmarking micro tests, I don't think there was any.
I do have one question about. I saw this issue regression in V4 Kraken JS Bench. So Kraken is very. It's not really a Node.js application. So, so are we interested in V8 specific applications?
I think that's another set of, you can then get into, we could be benchmarking the individual components, because, if V8 causes a regression or changes something that means that, some aspect is slow and that aspect is important to Node, it would be nice to know, on the more micro scale that it was V8 that did that, as opposed to it was, something in Node that changed. I think my first priority, though, was to build up our benchmarking on the Node side, and once we have that in place, to then maybe start looking at the components that go into it.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so that was 2 down. Track startup speed. So that basically, I think the only reason that's still open, because we are tracking startup speed now, is there were some suggestions on the are we testing the right thing? And I just haven't had the chance to. The rest of us, we already talked about the regression in J4 Kraken. So actually, Gareth, what's the latest on this?
So that's the one where we're waiting for something from Ali. So it is. I narrowed it down to it being a V8 change, which it was something in either hydrogen or lithium. I think it's hydrogen. So yeah, I'm waiting to hear back from Ali. So whilst it's not perhaps strictly Node related, it could result in a performance boost in Node.js. If we find out that it is a genuine regression and it's not a fix for something else that our benchmark was relying on.
Okay. Sounds good. Events, benchmark tests, I think that's really just that there were some things that didn't make it in from the old convergence repo that we should look at when somebody has time. I don't think anybody has done anything. JS Perf-like tool for benchmarking Node.js, IOJS, that was the one you mentioned, was it? Or is this a different one? Because it looks still open to me. Okay, there hasn't been any update on that. Maybe I should go through these offline and sort of poke people to see if there's going to be an update or not. Benchmarks for V8. So this is really just conversation that, at some point we may be able to get some benchmarks back to, um, back to the V8 team to run on Node in terms of, making sure they don't regress things.
So,
But,
Michael, I have one
yep.
comment about this particular one. So there are two comments. One is I did one of the Octane benchmark. I ran through V8 and also I ran through Node.js. And what I saw was I saw around 2 to 3% overhead, though the Octane benchmark doesn't have any node specific things in it. But Node can run that benchmark. When
Yep.
I run directly on V8 and when I run through Node.js, I saw 3% overhead while running through Node.js. So I am actually, we are spending some time, actually I'm spending some time understanding that 3% overhead, what the node is putting onto that. Hopefully there should be some optimization I can come out with. So that's first one. And the second one is I found around 18 to 20% performance opportunity in ray trace benchmark when I ran through V8. But it is very specific to V8. If I found something like that, how the Node.js community is it open for that kind of change in V8, or we always look for the Google's V8 release version?
Yeah, I mean, the standard policy is you have to land it first in Google. So if
Okay.
you've got a well-constrained change, you can get Google to accept it into master. Then we will consider backporting it to, the versions in Node today.
Okay.
But the first thing you do, so you can float patches, and there are patches floated. The first thing they'll say though is, has this already been accepted upstream? And if the answer is yes, then, depending on where it's being proposed, if you went back to 10 or 12, I think there wouldn't be a lot of appetite, just because, they're nearing end of life at the end of this year is they'll both be out of service. But for like 4 and certainly master, I could see the appetite of taking those.
Okay.
And the first one, I think it would be great if you opened an issue just to sort of, cover what you're going, just so that people can have some visibility into what's going on, and because I think that's interesting as well.
Okay. Yeah, this as I said, we are kind of new to this whole effort,
Yeah.
and so we are trying different things and encountering this different characteristics. So I will, I think, open an issue.
Yeah, just encouraging, issues are great to throw stuff in. People will probably give you some random comment suggestions. Some turn out to be really useful. Some are just, interesting, but it never hurts.
Okay.
Benchmarking dependencies, micro benchmarks, candidate benchmarks, and benchmarking use cases. I think the most of the work since the last discussion is on the benchmarking use cases with the PR, and the next ones will be things that will hopefully work off after that. But I think what I will do is, instead of moving straight to the candidate benchmarks, put the work in to get that initial copy of the runtime characteristics, because I think those two together maybe form the basis for the other ones. Okay, and that's our issues. So I think that's our review of the active issues. And I think that is the end of our agenda, which is good because we're pretty much out of time as well. Is there anything else people want to talk about before we close for today?
No, I've not got anything.
Me either. We're good.
Okay, that sounds great. So I'll set another meeting for maybe around 4 weeks from now, and otherwise we can chat through GitHub or any other mechanisms that make sense. So thanks a lot for your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.